Nexus, the Crown Herald Town of Elisir, Ambassadorial District. Mortis's Mage's Essentials. Local time, 14:45 hours. Emma.
I believe this may be of help, Cadet Booker.
The elemental spoke warmly, her crowd of floating axolotl-like pets maintaining their signature perpetual smiles, with one in particular attempting to hand me a sizable wand for its diminutive size. To say that I had my doubts would have been an understatement. To say that my interest wasn't piqued would also be a massive lie. This was because, unlike the previous sleazeball, Mortis actually seemed intent on helping, rather than profiting off of my apparent need for a wand. Moreover, the fact she wasn't overpromising anything and actually attempted to cater to my requirements was also nothing short of a complete departure from Ollie's business practices. What was being discussed here was actually within the realm of possibility. If anything, it boded well for one of the Eevee's current pet projects, the development of a mana sense visualizer. So if the Nexus truly did have something already cooked up for that very issue, then that might just help bootstrap development significantly. Work smarter, not harder, was something I lived by after all. I held out my hand, allowing the little axolotl-frilled lizard hybrid to drop a wand just about half its size onto it. Almost immediately, nothing happened.
Nothing?
The wandsmith inquired softly.
Nope, like I said, I don't have a mana field to interface with. Your armor being in the way, I presume?
Mortis rationalized out loud, before reaching out a hand to physically tap the wand's tip.
Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 250% above background radiation levels.
Not a moment later, following a mana radiation warning, did the etched filigree on the stick begin to glow, pulsating with a soft ethereal light. This pathway of light all culminated at the very tip, which glowed bright and began dancing through various colours, sort of like an RGB rave stick. This continued for several moments until suddenly it stopped, maintaining a simple white glow.
I'm afraid I don't get how this is supposed to... Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected. 300% above background radiation levels. Alert! Variable temperature surge detected. I stopped in my tracks as I felt the wand tugging my hand, as if urging it to move. Allow it to guide your hand, Cadet Booker,
Mortis instructed, with a motherly tone of voice, coinciding with the tip of the wand turning a deep red. I nodded, doing as instructed, following the wand's physical pull towards the direction it seemed almost magnetically attracted to. Its force increased with every degree I turned, until suddenly it stopped, at which point I was face to face with the source of its almost magnetic attraction, and its sudden shift in both colour and brightness. The Venerian's flame breath. "That's how it's supposed to work, Cadet Emma Booker," the Venerian spoke with his signature smug grin, his smarmy tone of voice egging me on, but failing to elicit a reaction as my excitable mind was assaulted with a torrential downpour of ideas, my rational mind stepping in to stop it, just short of an earth-shattering realization. Quick question. I'm assuming the range of this thing isn't limited to, say, this room, right? Or even this building? I blurted out, garnering a warm nod from the wandsmith.
That is correct, Emma Booker, though the pull of the wand is proportional to the strength of the spell being cast. However, with enough training, you could very well become attuned to any slight tug or pull. Thus, a definitive range of effect, as it were, is difficult to discern, as it depends on the training of the mage. This seemingly simple and straightforward answer suddenly opened up the floodgates, allowing for my mind to be swamped with ideas, as that earth-shattering realization quickly evolved into something else entirely, an indescribable draw to innovate. We'd just skipped several major milestones worth of grueling R&D in a single stroke. Eevee, I think we've just unlocked a boost in the mana radiation sensory analytics and detection system, MRSAD's range and accuracy. I spoke excitedly at the Eevee, amongst many more upgrades and boosters.
My eyes were now locked onto the object. My hand, my real hand just beneath the base of the armor's wrist, trembled with not shock, but raw and pure excitement. We were finally making progress.
Do you have any further questions, Cadet Emma Booker?
So, I'm assuming this thing has 3 primary modes of use? I shot out excitedly, my former tone and cadence evaporating almost instantly, as urgency filled every ounce of my voice. Its physical tugging corresponding to the localization of a given surge in mana, the direction the spell is being cast from, I began, as I practically shot up, taking a step towards the water elemental. Its brightness corresponding to the intensity of the spell being cast? I took another excited step, my face beaming with excitement. And its color, I guess it corresponds to the type of spell being cast. It was around this point that Thacia moved up towards me, grabbing me by the shoulder and staring at me intensely.
Emma, please, it's quite unbecoming of you to...
Oh, please forgive her, Your Highness. Mortis interjected, with a raised hand and an amused chuckle. This is to be expected from those near blind to mana sight. It's a reaction I don't often see, given how mana sight is still present amongst even the most severe of immature mana fielder cases. So to see this once again, to witness my creations helping those in need, it sparks great joy in my old heart, because this is what I live for. The water elemental stood up, her axolotl staying behind, as she placed a single hand on my shoulder. I live to serve those in need. Oh, the Earth Realmer definitely needs help, that's for certain, Eleanor chided with a bemused grin. I ignored him, of course, as my attention was focused solely on the wandsmith.
And to address your earlier questions, Cadet Booker, you are indeed correct on all counts.
She nodded deeply, sidestepping Eleanor's chires like a river parting against an immovable rock. Her indifference to him, perhaps a hint as to her own noble heritage.
However, there's also this.
The water elemental stepped back, grabbing one of her floating axolotls, as the wand began shifting between various fixed colors.
The fishbowl's ability to float is a result of a fixed enchantment, though you must be relatively close to an enchantment in order to ascertain its presence.
I nodded along intently, not once interrupting as I awaited every ounce of sweet intel the wandsmith had to offer.
However, I am afraid this is the limit to what the wand can offer, she announced, with a heavy and regret-filled breath. This wand was, after all, designed with the integration of a mage's mana field in mind, and, as a result, these features we've just discussed are more so adjacent accessories to its main function.
Its main function is to somehow allow you to better visualize mana fields and mana streams, I imagine, I offered, garnering a nod from the elemental.
Correct. It does so for a process we call mana resonance, she began.
However, no sooner did those words leave her mouth, did I begin to internally chuckle. So I guess you could say it images the world around you through mana resonance, I managed out, with a barely contained chuckle. In effect, it's mana resonance imaging?
I suppose you could phrase it that way, yes.
The wandsmith nodded congenially.
It's certainly a novel way of phrasing it,
she continued, before getting back on topic.
Mana resonance relies on the wand itself to directly augment into a mage's mana field, following which it draws from a mage's mana stores directly, generating a series of continuous mana resonance streams, with the intent of gently impacting local mana streams and mana fields. Following impact, there is the expectation that some of this generated resonance will, in a sense, bounce back towards the wand's direction, creating a sort of shadow imprint of the mana fields and mana streams around it. Sorta like sonar, lidar, radiation, or echolocation, I spoke internally, towards the Eevee, as the virtual intelligence responded with an observation of its own. More accurately, an entirely new medium of feedback imaging. Exactly, I responded inwardly. So, do you think we can make something of this, Scifi? The latter requires integration with a system I do not possess, so its feasibility for integration, FFI, is non-existent. However, further studies on the functional operation of object of interest number 00721A, wand, may provide insight into the creation of a novel sensor array utilizing similar principles in integration with pre-existing manner detection sensor suites. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We now have an existing working principle to base our tech off of. So instead of shooting in the dark, we now have a clear path to work towards. With that being said though, do you think you could work on a quick patch to our existing manner sensor systems? Clarify, patch, the Eevee replied bluntly. The wand's accessory systems and the potential for it to augment MRSAD with just a little bit of good old-fashioned jury rigging. The intensity feature may be a bit redundant, but it's the other two that's game-changing. From increasing our range of spotting localized mana radiation bursts to what is arguably most game-changing, determining the precise type of spell being cast, we've just gotten our shortcut into a next-gen sensor suite. But given how we can't just integrate it directly into the suit's systems, I was thinking of a sort of patch, an analog to digital conversion algorithm or something, you know? A system to interpret OOL number 00721A's analog outputs into viable sensor data via physical and visual feedback? Precisely, I responded just as bluntly. And maybe a purpose-designed housing unit or something too, like a gyroscopic ball or maybe a permanent housing compartment on the arms. Or heck, maybe we could even tape it onto the helmet's sensor kit. OOL number 00721A's sensitivity and specificity parameters are still unknown, the Eevee responded matter-of-factly, sidestepping my latter suggestions entirely. Further testing will be required to determine whether integration will impact the minimum acceptable margin of error thresholds for mission-critical systems. We can do that. Moreover, that brings me to another point. I quickly shifted my attention and my mic output back toward the wandsmith. Lady Mortis, I do have another question, if that's quite alright with you. I began politely, garnering a soft nod from the water elemental. Yes, Cadet Booker. Well, I was just wondering, does the wand come with, like, an instruction manual or something? I'm assuming that because the colours correspond to various spell types and such, that there's got to be a reference to tell what each colour represents? I am afraid that this is where your education comes in, Cadet Booker. The wandsmith responded with all the warmth of maternal wisdom. Your classes will cover all forms of magic eventually. It is now up to you, as a pupil of the Transgression Academy, to learn this for yourself. Because remember, this wand, this dowsing rod, is a means by which to empower yourself as a mage. There are no shortcuts towards that end goal. She smiled before settling back in her seat. Moreover, given that each wand is functionally unique in its creation, the various colours it generates may be wildly different. Thus, a universal catch-all system is very much impractical. After all, a wand is an extension of a mage, and not a simple tool or implement. Right, I acknowledged with a frustrated breath, just as the Eevee pinged me with another pertinent point I had almost entirely overlooked. Further iterative analysis on the practical potential use of OOL number 00721A is available for preliminary report. Give it to me briefly, Eevee, I spoke inwardly. There is a potential alternative use case scenario for the intensity function of OOL number 00721A. Analysis of its luminosity indicates a various gradient increase in intensity upon detection of a static spell comparable to logarithmic scaling models. Preliminary iterative analysis suggests that a visualization aid could potentially be modeled and overlaid atop of the HUD, allowing for a rudimentary form of mana-filled visualization, albeit limited to static spells and with a significant drawback attributed to delayed scanning frequency. I can't believe I almost overlooked that, I admitted. Keep working on the iterative analysis of the wand, Eevee. We'll have loads to talk about when we get back to the tent, and potentially a lot of housing and casing units to print out as well. Acknowledged. You are a bright and motivated individual, Cadet Booker. Mortis spoke reassuringly, as if interpreting that sudden bout of dead air from her perspective as a loss of confidence on my part. That much is certain. As such, I have no doubt that you will be able to master the use of this wand, and in time, it will become as much a part of you as any one of your own senses. I appreciate that, Lady Mortis. Thank you. I dipped my head down in respect before a few other practical matters entered my head. There's actually another point that needs to be addressed. You said that it typically draws power from a mage's mana stores, right? But given my situation, how do I... Within the wand is a storage basin for a mana vial, Cadet Booker, the water elemental interjected. It is capable of operating independently from a mana field as a result. Moreover, given you are only using its accessory functions, a single mana vial should last you a fair bit of time. Understood. I nodded once more before shifting my attention towards my purse pouch tightly clinched on Eleanor's belt, and the now empty tray of biscuits next to him. Would you care for more tea or snacks? The water elemental inquired. However, before Eleanor could respond, I quickly chimed in to stop what would otherwise be another bottomless buffet of baked goods. I don't think I'll be taking much more of your time or hospitality, Lady Mortis, I responded politely, garnering a fiery glare from the deluxe kobold. So, as much as I hate to segue into this, I'm curious as to how much this will run me. Given the uniqueness of the wand and the lack of its contemporaries, its current value is just about 2,050 gold pieces, Cadet Booker, the wandsmith replied, as tactfully as she could given the massive price tag. A price that absolutely gutted me inside and out. However, before I could even respond, the water elemental suddenly conjured up a piece of paper, a parchment that I immediately recognized as a contract. However, I do recognize the difficulties that being a new realmer brings, she began compassionately. In addition, I can only imagine how difficult life at the Academy would be, given your condition. The last thing I would want to do would be to place upon you such a large financial burden. As such, I am willing to offer you a deal, Cadet Booker. Here we go, I thought to myself. Let's see what messed up contract you have for me now, Nexus. What's it gonna be? My soul? My loyalty? My service? Or some weird messed up clause like Eleanor's whole? I am willing to settle for an upfront down payment of 1,000 gold, followed by 4 successive installments to be paid at your leisure, Mortis proclaimed warmly, placing down the contract in front of us with little more than a few paragraphs worth of plain, straightforward text. The entire gang almost immediately went to town on the document, with Thasia's keen eyes, Thaumin's discerning glare, and Eleanor's distrustful visage landing on every letter of every word. A few minutes passed before each of them gave me their individual go-aheads. All right, I nodded. I think we can settle on that, I continued, before reaching for my pen to settle the deal. The lack of magical ink or any surge of mana radiation made it clear that this was perhaps the first actual contract to be signed without any hidden shenanigans, once again reaffirming the rather straightforward nature of the agreement. And following a flow of coins from my purse to the water elemental, the whole thing was settled. Mortis stood up almost as soon as the transaction was done, as she grabbed one of the fanciest boxes I'd ever seen to date, a literal marble and granite box with glowing golden filigree from one of the shelves. Following this, she gently reached for the wand and placed it inside the masterfully carved interior of the box, the whole thing settling seamlessly into its confines. Whilst it may sometimes seem as if the world is a merciless cliff face, incapable of being scaled, know that this wand and my services shall forever be by your side to at least offer some respite amidst the seemingly impossible. Magic, after all, is the refuge of the dreams of the sapient. Do not let anyone rip that dream away from you. She spoke confidently, before handing the box to me with a reassuring smile, one that was mirrored by her army of axolotls. I dipped my head deeply at that, as despite all the highs of excitement swelling from my mind,
One errant thought came through in spite of its banality. "I don't imagine you'd have a bag for this," I blurted out. Nexus. The Crown Herald town of Elisir. Ambassadorial District. Boutique Boulevard en route to the Adventurers Guildhall. Local time, 15:25 hours. Emma. We left Mortis's Mage's Essentials with not only a renewed faith in the wandsmithing industry, but with a strange sense of warmth and satisfaction that was only dampened by the cost it took to acquire said wand. The investment, despite being in exchange for an item worth more than its weight in gold, quite literally given its price, was bound to pay off though, in ways I could have never previously imagined. "So what's next, Princess?" I turned to Thacia with a skip in my power-armoured step. "We've purchased all that is required of us from the course syllabus," the Princess responded, following a thorough double-checking of her planner. "Which means we should be headed back to the Adventuring Guild," Thamin surmised. "Precisely," Thacia reaffirmed, but not before something across the street managed to catch my eye. The building was unlike any other on the block. In fact, it seemed to stand significantly taller than most. This was primarily due to a quirk of its construction, one that I wasn't at all expecting. A literal wizard tower piercing through its angled tiled roof, completely divorcing it from the rest of its neighbour's uniform height limit. The whole thing looked like one of those weird postmodern architectural messes, combining architectural elements that didn't at all seem like it belonged, if only to draw your attention to just how weird it all was. And to its credit, it worked. As despite the admittedly ugly choice of stylistic choices, it stood out. And that's where they get you. Because the longer you stared at it, the more the weirdness kept going, with off-kilter windows, doors plastered several stories up on the facade, and even animated miniature golems of dragons, wyverns, and all sorts of flying creatures circling the narrow and spindly wizard tower. "What the heck is that?" I pointed towards the unwieldy structure, only to earn a collective sigh from everyone. "A souvenir shop," Eleanor muttered out under a dismissive breath. "A den of useless knickknacks and tacky paraphernalia that is as creatively bankrupt as it is devoid of talented craftsmanship," the Venerian continued, practically turning his nose up at the wacky establishment. "Huh," I responded, with a growing sense of curiosity. "Say, Thacia, do you think we can squeeze in one impromptu visit into our itinerary?" The princess's features immediately shifted to one of disappointment, as she crisply flipped through her planner, if only to return a glance that only a mother could give to a child, asking to stop at a drive-through. This was where my helmet came at a disadvantage, as I couldn't employ the puppy-eye pleading that had worked so well for me in the past. But that didn't stop me from trying, though. "Please?" I pleaded. "A quarter hour," Thacia responded with a despondent breath. "And please try your best to restrain yourself from any impulse purchases, Emma." "No promises, Princess," I shot back with a sly chuckle, dragging the rest of the gang along with me for what I'd file in my report under Field Cultural Research. Appropriately enough, the first thing that caught our attention was a revolving door that rotated on a horizontal axis. We arrived to find a store that has somehow perfectly balanced themed quirkiness with mercantile practicality. These traits personified by a service counter decorated with a bunch of curiosities, protected behind luminous glass that seemed to glow brighter the closer we got to them. Maybe it was a security feature, but the lighting also seemed to serve as spotlights for these items. The most eye-catching thing in this section was without a doubt the gigantic turtle shell that rested atop a wide velvety pillow. The shell had an earthy colour, but was polished instead of rugged, the lips of it lined with a plush fabric. The carapace scutes were pointed and slicked back, each one tipped in crownings made of various precious metals. Brass on the outermost, silver in between, and some gold caps in the middle portion. Quite honestly, I was surprised that this, of all things, wasn't behind any glass. The whole place gave me theme park souvenir shop vibes, with tastefully themed corners that seemed to be referencing cultural and regional themes, that I simply was not privy to. Each little section seemed to be built with aesthetics and features that were supposed to be representative of a given region, and it was clear some of them were far more impressive than the rest. With the first among these being what I could only describe as a volcano and lava-themed region, with the floor space of that little nook covered by a thick layer of glass, covering what appeared to be flowing magma beneath the floor. Within this little themed area were all sorts of, as Eleanor put it, useless knickknacks, ranging from little animated postcards to painted plates and its accompanying utensils. Next to that were what I could describe as little snow globes that had fully animated volcanoes within them, expertly detailed and dynamically moving. I picked one up, instinctively shaking one, causing the little world within to shake and rumble, leading to a volcanic explosion that covered the entire globe in a thick, goopy sea of red-hot magma.
I'm afraid if you shake it, you'll buy it.
A boisterous but firm voice emerged from one of the many corners of the close-to-cluttered room. We looked around trying to find the source of the voice, before hearing a series of thumps from the counter up front. Approaching us slowly, rising from what appeared to be a nap, was the encrusted turtle-like turtle, with an equally ornate cane in his hand.
I only jest, of course,
he corrected himself, yawning out the first word before making a dry chuckle.
Those things reconstruct after an hour or so, or immediately if you put some mana into it.
He eventually gestured for me to return the lava globe, which I did so without question.
Where are my manners? My name is Baronet Kathan Kafkan, the eternal proprietor of this fine establishment.
The man bowed, or at least he dipped his body as much as he could, given the encumbrance that was the shell.
I take it you are all first years?
Indeed, we are, I replied matter-of-factly.
I see.
Kathan adjusted the fabric along the lip of his shell, winding his neck as if to admire his vast collection of knickknacks.
My vendibles must have some enticement to your eyes, if you've come to take a nogle. Feel free to discover the wonders collected from many worlds, my youths of esteem. I'd be happy to share the histories of what you come across. Or just simply package them aptly without a word to waste if you so choose.
While that seemed a bit glum, the turtle chuckled at the humour he found in it. Actually, I do have a question about the building itself, if you don't mind.
Oh?
Well, it is quite distinct from the rest of the structures in town. If anything, it feels almost out of place. I was wondering if there's...
A story behind that?
The man interjected with an excitable smile. Yeah, precisely, I acknowledged.
It's simple, really. This establishment existed prior to the incorporation of Elisir into the ranks of the Crown Heralds, he announced proudly, a sense of pained nostalgia colouring his voice. Thus, the entire ambassadorial district was built around me, he continued, his arms raised as far as they could, pointing his gem-encrusted cane towards the ceiling. Therefore, I, among a handful of others, was partially spared from the strict zoning laws of the district, save for, of course, the dreadful off-white paint scheme the Crown seems to be so insistent on forcing upon us all.
So you were grandfathered in, essentially, I surmised.
Correct, New Realmer, he nodded,
then just as swiftly took the opportunity to introduce the rest of the various knickknacks on offer.
Though you can rest assured my wares do not reflect that fact, unlike the stocks of a certain wand maker.
He spoke with a wink, gesturing towards more of the extensive lineup across what he began to refer to as the various core regions of the Nexus.
From the eternally spiteful region of the Brimstone Expanse, eternally burning from the righteous fury of His Eternal Majesty's final stand against the forces of evil.
He started from where we stood before gesturing for us to move along with him on this impromptu field trip.
To the infinite archipelagos of the boundless seas.
He raised his arms wide towards what I could only describe as the Sealand portion of the souvenir shop, complete with a whole wall of snow globes, depicting not just sunny seaside towns, but what appeared to be ships, flotillas, and entire fleets. Indeed, what drew me in wasn't the detail of the models in and of itself, but rather the actual types of ships on display. As unlike the caravel-like ship from Thasia's sights here, what was on display here appeared to be a wooden vessel without sails or seams. In fact, the wood almost seemed to be melted into a solid mass, and in the place of sails, there appeared to be additional masts, each of which towered high and ungainly above the ship, almost to the point of unwieldiness, reminding me of those rotor ships from the mid-21st century. "What sorts of ships are those?" I inquired, pointing at a particular ship in a bottle about half the size of Eleanor.
"Standard Royal Merchant Mariner craft, employed by many of the maritime kingdoms and duchies," the turtle explained, gesturing towards the model in question. "To your new Roma eyes, a vessel this large without sails or oars must be quite foreign to you, but to our discerning Nexian eyes—"
He paused, adding emphasis to the Nexian nature, with a grandiose tone that hid well the humour he meant to convey.
"This sort of vessel is indeed quite common. It relies not on the power of sail, but instead a combination of the ambient power of mana and the enriched mana stores provided by the graces of nobility. A truly magical vessel for a magical age."
"Right," I nodded, my eyes going over the Evie's frantic logging of every ounce of intel there was to scrounge from this interaction. "That's certainly interesting, all right."
"Indeed it is,"
the old man nodded, as he moved on to other regions seamlessly, going from icy tundras to expansive taigras, to great canyons, and then, finally, towards what appeared to be Eleanor's mountain kingdoms. However, before we could arrive, my eyes landed on what appeared to be a neglected portion of the store. One that was stacked high with what I could only describe as... "Are those plushies?" I asked, gesturing towards the large beanbag-like slime, and the horde of soft plushies atop of that, with the one sitting atop of the whole pile being what was undoubtedly a Venerian.